The objective of this video is to discuss the derivative of inverse trigonometric functions. Didiscuss natin kung ano yung mga formula na ginagamit para makapag-derive ng mga inverse trig functions. And of course, i-apply natin ang mga formulas na ito sa pamamagitan ng 10 examples. For inverse trigonometric functions, kaya nga natin sila tinatawag na inverse because they perform the opposite operation of the trigonometric functions such as the sine, the cosine, the tangent, the cosecant, secant, and the cotangent functions. So, yun lang naman yung tatandaan ninyo that inverse trigonometric functions actually allow us or they help us to find an angle when given two sides of a triangle. Diba? Dati naman na natin ginagamit yon. Kung meron tayong sokatawa, meron din tayong tinatawag na cho, sha, kao. Now, if there is a need for you to identify the value for, let's say, the domain of an inverse trigonometric function, all you have to do is to remember the following. Kapag naghahanap ka ng domain ng inverse trigonometric function, all you have to do is to get the range of the original function. So, kunwari, meron kang hinahanap na domain for the inverse sine of an angle, then kunin mo yung range ng sine because sine is the original function. So, ganun naman, kapag hinahanap mo yung range ng inverse trigonometric function, all you have to do is to get and identify the domain of the original function. Kaya nga sila tinawag na inverse trigonometric functions kasi they are somewhat the opposites of each other, inverses of each other. For the notations of inverse trigonometric functions, we write them as follows. One is, you can rewrite this using the power -1, or kung babasahin ninyo ito, this is basically the inverse sine of u. So yung u dito is taken as the angle for that particular function. So since -1 ang power dito, pwede natin gamitin yung laws on exponents that you can place it in the denominator and magiging positive na yan. So basically, this is just sine of u raised to 1. Pero hindi na natin yan inilalagay. If you can remember your trigonometric identities, 1 all over sine u, or let's say the inverse sine u, is basically the cosecant u. That's why they are called the inverse identities. And lastly, we have another format that shows the inverse trigonometric function wherein you have to make use of the word arc. So ito, arc sine u is equivalent to these two being the inverse trigonometric functions. So kaya tinatawag na arc sine yan, or kunwari sa ibang functions, pwedeng arc cosecant u, arc tangent u, and so on, is because for a given value of trigonometric function, they kind of produce the length of an arc needed to obtain that particular value. So doon nanggaling yung word na arc para sa mga inverse trigonometric functions. So sabi nga natin na ang ganitong format para sa inverse functions ay pwede ring isulat as the derivative of 1 all over sine of the angle, let's say u, with respect to x. Parehas yan dito sa format na to. And lastly, you can just write this as the derivative of arc sine of u with respect to x. So itong tatlong to ay pare-parehas ng goal, which is to derive the inverse of sine u. If we have the function y is equal to the inverse sine of u being the angle, kailangan mo raw alamin kung ano yung derivative ng inverse sine u. Yun nga lang, wala pa tayong alam tungkol sa formula na yan. So let's make it or transform this function in such a way that we can use some familiar formulas na napag-aralan natin dati. So kung ita-transform natin ito, magiging sine of y equal ito na sa u. And from that, we can derive this implicitly by getting the derivative of sine y with respect to x and the derivative of u with respect to x. Okay, and from this, pwede na nating ilagay yung derivative ng sin y with respect to x, the cosine of y, and then get the derivative of y with respect to x. And then on the other side, let's just leave this as the du all over dx. Again, the goal of differentiation is to show a formula that will give you the slope of this particular function. So, pwede nating i-divide ang dalawang side ng equation by cosine y para maiwan yung dy all over dx. So, this is further divided by cosine y. Cosine y will cancel out and we are left with the dy all over dx equal to the du all over dx, and this is further divided by cosine of y. From this, it is quite difficult to work on kasi yung y dito equivalent sa inverse sine of u. Tapos yung u dito is the angle here, so medyo complicated pa kung wala tayong magiging reference para dyan. So we're gonna make use of a common method that we have learned before. Let's say we have here a right triangle with this angle, the right angle, or that's a 90 degrees, and this one will be the y. Kung meron tayong expression such as this one, that the sine y is equal to u, and you know that sine is equivalent to the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. Or basically, ang trig functions kasi natin ay equivalent sa mga ratio ng sides ng isang right triangle. Diba? So, ibig sabihin, kung meron kang sine y, ito yung y, ay equal daw sa u, or basically that is u divided by 1 para lang makapagpakita tayo ng ratio dyan. Ibig sabihin, ang opposite daw ay equivalent sa, or ang opposite side ay equal sa u, and ang ating hypotenuse ay equal sa 1. If you want to identify the missing angle here, you just have to recall your Pythagorean theorem. Or basically, yung a daw dito ay equal sa square root of 1 minus u squared. From that, I think we can rewrite this derivative of y with respect to x as yung du all over dx, i-retain natin yan, and then ang cosine y natin will be coming from this triangle. Again, cosine is your adjacent all over the hypotenuse side. So if this is your y and this is the adjacent side, you get this square root of 1 minus u squared. And then its hypotenuse is 1, so basically, ang cosine y natin ay equivalent sa square root of 1 minus u squared divided by 1. And we can write it here as 1 minus u squared. And that's it. That if you have to derive the y, ano yung y natin dito? Yung inverse sine of u. The derivative of, you can use inverse sine of u, or pwede rin namang the derivative of arc sine of u with respect to x is basically the one that we have derived, the du all over dx divided by the square root of 1 minus u squared. Again, u is the angle for this particular function. What if kailangan naman nating i-derive yung inverse cosine of u? Again, u is the angle here. So, simulan din natin parang parehas dun sa principle ng pagde-derive ng formula para sa inverse sine. Let's take y as the function for inverse cosine of u. And since wala nga tayong formula para sa cosine, pwede natin itong i-rewrite as the cosine of y equal to the u. And from this, pwede na natin i-derive ito implicitly. Again, the goal here is to get a formula that will show you the slope of this particular function. That if we have the dy all over dx, meaning to say both sides of the equation was divided by negative sine of y. Para lang ma-eliminate natin ito at maiwan yung dy all over dx. So, sa kabilang side, meron tayong naiwan na du all over dx, and this is further divided by the negative sine of y. Or pwede namang as a whole, this is already a negative du all over dx divided by the sine of y. And again, we want to transform this equation in such a way that the variables are familiar and you will not be using this cosine u here para doon sa y na value. So again, we are going to make use of the Pythagorean Theorem wherein this is the y dito sa ating function. So, if your cosine y is equal to u, and you know that cosine is the ratio of the adjacent side to the hypotenuse side, meaning to say, ang adjacent dito ay u at ang ating hypotenuse ay equal sa 1. So, ang nawawala naman na dito ay yung opposite na leg or the opposite side to the angle y. So, if you're gonna solve for that, so isa shortcut na lang natin. So, from this, ilalagay na natin ang dy all over dx as equivalent to the negative of du all over dx, and then yung sine y natin. The sine y is opposite all over hypotenuse. So, ang opposite natin ay equivalent sa square root of 1 minus u squared, and the hypotenuse is 1. So, parang parehas dun sa isang derivation natin kanina, ang sin y ay equal sa 1 minus u squared. So from this, pwede na tayong makapag-solve ng derivative ng inverse cosine. So pwede nating i-rewrite ito as the derivative of, again, these are the same notations provided that you are dealing with inverse trigonometric functions. So derivative of arc cosine of u with respect to x. And this is equivalent to the negative of du all over dx divided by the square root of 1 minus u squared. Ang u dito ay yung angle dito. Just to complete the derivation of the basic trigonometric functions when it comes to their formulas for their derivatives, we have the derivative of the inverse tangent of u. So, same, kunin lang natin yung principle ng function. Let's say, ang function natin dito na dinederive ay inverse tangent of u. Since hindi pa available ang formula natin para sa derivative ng inverse tangent, then we just have to transform this function in such a way that this is tangent of y, and this is equivalent to u. Okay, yung tangent y, kapag dinerive mo yan, alam mo na meron kang mailalagay dyan na equivalent value. Ibig sabihin, pag dinerive mo ang tangent of y with respect to x, and this is also derived with respect to x, ang magiging value dito ay the secant of x squared. And you have to derive the angle with respect to x as well. Sa kabila, meron tayong du all over dx. So from this, our goal is to show the slope or a formula that will provide the slope of this function. So we are going to isolate dy all over dx. And then sa kabilang side, magkakaroon tayo ng du all over dx. Again, to isolate this on the left side of the equation, pwede mong i-divide both sides by secant x squared. We are left with the d all over dx divided by secant squared x, or that's secant x squared instead. From this, pwede nating gawin na just like the first two formulas, pwede nating kunin ang equivalent ng secant x sa pamamagitan ng Pythagorean Theorem. That if we have this right angle and this is the y, wherein tangent y is equal to u. Ano ulit ang tangent natin? That's opposite or the ratio of the opposite side to the adjacent side to the angle. So, ang opposite natin dito ay u at ang ating adjacent side ay 1 because basically this is u divided by 1. So, if we are going to solve for the unknown side here, which is the hypotenuse, we can just write this as the and from this, ano ulit ang secant natin? Kung meron tayong SOHCAHTOA, meron din tayong tinatawag na CHO, SHA, I know you are all familiar with this one. So, CHO here is for the cosecant and its ratio will be the hypotenuse divided by the opposite side. Kapag secant naman, we have the hypotenuse divided by the adjacent side. And if we have the cow, that's the cotangent is equal to the adjacent side divided by the opposite side. So we are concerned with SHA because we have the secant as our trigonometric function. So according to SHA, we have the hypotenuse side divided by adjacent side. So if our hypotenuse side is the square root of 1 plus u squared, you have to divide that by the adjacent side. So basically, 1 lang iyan. So, kung i-rewrite natin ito, we have the dy all over dx equal ito sa du all over dx divided by the secant squared x, or sabi nga natin kanina, the hypotenuse divided by the adjacent side. So that's square root of 1 plus u squared. However, this function is squared, so you also have to square this one. If this index here is 2, then this 2 will also cancel out, leaving us with the derivative of the function y with respect to x equivalent to the du all over dx divided by, matatanggal na yung radical sign dyan, so meron na tayong 1 plus u squared. Or, this is also equivalent to the derivative of arc tangent, or basically the inverse tangent of u with respect to x. And that is the formula for the derivative of inverse trigonometric functions. And for the remaining inverse trigonometric functions, we have the inverse cosecant, inverse secant, and the inverse cotangent of an angle. You can always make use of this method to derive the formula. But in order to save you from tedious solving and lengthy analysis, you can always memorize the following.